We are very happy to welcome Mr. Gran and Micha-El. They are connected with Mr. Paul Brunton Society of America. They are also coming from States. They are most well known to our Guru Maharaj, Sri Swami Chidanand Maharaj, and they are also psychologists. We are very glad to hear them during this Christmas retreat. Mr. Gran and Micha-El, welcome. Please.
Well, we are very honored to be here. That's an understatement. We want to begin with a quote from Gurudev Swami Sivananda Maharaj. He always began his talks by saying, "The goal of life is self-realization." So that's why we're here. That was the goal of Paul Brunton's life. That's the goal of our lives. And we hope that we can offer a little drop of help in achieving that goal. So my birth name is Alan Berkowitz.
My birthday name is Magda Beatriz, but my spiritual name is Gran. That is how the people know us, Micha-El and Gran. For me, it's a great honor to be here today with all you, and in the name of the true, and hope you could share something that could, could help or could be important for you too, as important for us.
So we want to start with the prayer of Paul Brunton to the Master. So if you have someone that you take as a master or guru, or you have someone that you look up to or who inspires you, you can think of that person or that ideal while I read this. I turn to thee, O Master, for inspiration to rise above and excel myself, but I create that inspiration by my own will. I kneel before you for guidance in the problems and decisions of life, but I receive that guidance by taking you as an example of moral perfection to be followed and copied. I call upon you for help in my weakness and difficulty, my darkness and tribulation, but I produce and shape that help by trying to absorb it telepathically from your inner being. So the wording of this is very characteristic of Paul Brunton, and I think it's very consistent with what you study here, which is that we have to do the work, right? We have to We need inspiration from our teacher, but we create that inspiration from within ourselves. We kneel before them for guidance, but we take them as an example of moral perfection to be followed and copied. Now it's a whole other discussion who is worthy of that, right? Who is worthy of that? But we perceive that you have very worthy models and ideals here that you're safe to follow, and that the lineage is very strong, the impulse was very strong, and it continues now. I call upon you for help in my weakness and difficulty, but I produce and shape that help by trying to absorb it telepathically from your inner being. So we know the quest is not an easy thing, the spiritual path, and we have a lot of work to do on ourselves, but there's a lot of help available. And that's partly why we're all here.
We could start then share a little bit with you about who is Paul Brunton and the importance of him, his teachings, and something about his teachings, how he called his teachings, he called philosophy. But we're going to explain all this for you, but first let's start. Paul Brunton was, he lived from 1898 to 1981. He born in London as a Jewish man in some family, Jewish family. And he, since a younger age, he said he had so much mystical experiences, but he passed through some normal stages as, normal person is growing. And he married one time, he had one child. And his development happened when in early age he lost his mother. She died, and he had some opportunity, and also the father in younger age, and the many circumstances in his life provided him to study Christianity, and later he became a part of the Philosophic Society in London, but not in this rest forever, because he never was limited or attached to any tradition. He studied universal. He was looking for the universal truth. And what happened, it is when he was interested that he traveled around all world, like through the world, and he met different great teachers from ancient tradition, seekers in spiritual life. He met yogis, sages, also political, social, and spiritual influent people. He make interviews, he give interviews, he had really a rich life, but he was searching the truth. Then one day he decided to come to India in 1933. And since that, it starts some important, step in his life. But how he came to India, correct? He had a few teachers in London that was, different traditions. But one day, he met some royal person in some bookstore. And this man was from India. And he was some initiate person also, with so much knowledge and wisdom. And Paul Brunton became so attracted to this man and to the culture, to the teachings. That was one of the reasons he decided to come into India. But some circumstances when he was younger, also in the school, was another event. He was so boring in some class as a younger boy. But when the teacher showed up, in the board, a map of India, he wake up in that moment. Then, many incidents and circumstances in his life brought him here in India in 1933 for the first time. In 1935, for the second time. In the 40s, he was here when the Second World War started, and he became trapped here for 7 years. After that, he came in 1952, and was the last time he came. And after that, in the 60s, he took some life as hermit person, like he moved to Switzerland. He didn't travel anymore, and he dedicated himself to writing, and he published, 10 books from 1934 to 52, and postmortem after that he was published some collection of 16 volumes named The Notebooks of Paul Brunton, that I will tell you later. Because now we would like to share a little bit with you the story, how, he met Ramana Maharishi, that was so important teacher in his life. And also, many people know Paul Brunton to the book A Search in Secret India. This book make him known not only in the world but also in India. And Paul Brunton was a dedicated disciple of him for long time. And after Ramana, after he leave Ramana still told people that he was his eyes and the Shakti of him was with him. Then I leave this for Micha-El, tell the story to you.
So one comment, a lot of us here from North America or Europe, we have to remember that in the 1930s, during the British colonial time, there were very, very few white people who had any respect or interest in what we are studying here. And to endure the hardships that he endured, to travel all over India and meet these teachers, was a sign of his belief that the goal of life is self-realization. The other thing, this man he met in the bookstore, we like to say there are no coincidences. Throughout his life and the lives of many great teachers, he would have these unexpected meetings with these great beings who would show up as if by accident, who would give him an impulse. And we see in studying the details of his life, is like we all have what is called a dharma. We have a purpose in life, but a lot of times we have no clue what that is, but the teacher sees it in us and pushes us to achieve that. So that was what happened. So he comes to India and he writes the following. With regard to yogis and fakirs, I found that religious fanatics, self-deluded gurus, and foolish sentimentalists could be discovered in plenty. But genuine sages and fakirs possessed of demonstrable occult powers were rare enough to make one despair of ever locating them. So that's what happened. He got really bummed out because he was looking for a real teacher and he couldn't find one. He had a lot of disappointments. Then someone wanted him to meet the Shankaracharya of Kanchipuram, one of the four maths of Shankara. And Shankara agreed. That was the first white person that Shankara ever gave an interview to. And PB felt his power. And he said, would you be my teacher? And Shankara said, no, I can't. My responsibilities prevent me. But you have to go see Ramana Maharshi. That's another characteristic of a great teacher. They say, well, you don't belong here. You have to go over there. They're not trying to capture us. So he goes to meet Ramana, and he says the following. There is something in this man that holds my attention as steel filings are held by a magnet. I cannot turn my gaze away from him. My initial bewilderment, my perplexity at being totally ignored, suddenly fades away. Then I become aware of a silent, restless change which is taking place within my mind. A steady river of quietness seems to be flowing near me. A great peace is penetrating the inner reaches of my being, and my thought-tortured brain is beginning to arrive at some rest. So Ramana Maharshi becomes his teacher. He extends his stay, and then he goes back to England. And then he goes through one of these tests that we have to go through. He says, all the world seems futile. I don't know what awaits me tomorrow. I don't understand life half as certainly as I did 10 years ago, and I am pessimistic about everything. So he gets bummed out, right? But he keeps persisting. He writes the book Search in Secret India, and after 3 years, he's ready to come back to India. He's meditating, and Ramana appears to him and says, let me find it. Ramana says to him, my son, all is not well. Have you forgotten compassion? Should you go forward to add to your own tiny store of knowledge while others starve for the crumbs of wisdom? Will you commune with the divine ones when there are those who look for God but perceive only a barrier? Stay thy feet if needs be, but forget not thy fellows in distress. Leave not for the land of waving palms, India, until you have well regarded these words. So we see this all over here from Swamiji. Compassion means that we serve others, we help others, we have a responsibility to share what we've been given with others. So PB writes The Search and Secret, he writes The Secret Path, which is his second book. And now he goes back to India, a famous person. He said, one must participate in God's work by assisting evolution and redeeming the world, not squat idly in peace alone. And before he came back, Maharshi said to one of the Ramakrishna monks that was there, he said, isn't it amazing that in such a short time he has absorbed and understood so much of Indian wisdom? So as Gran said, Ramana said, Paul Brunton is one of my eyes. My Shakti is working through him. Follow him closely. And it's pretty amazing that he wrote 3 books in 3 years and 9 books in 10 years. So something was definitely happening.
Then when he came back to England, he continued, of course, writing books. And what I want to share with you, why he call his work philosophy, because he say here, this I may say that my work has always been based on first-hand knowledge of what I wrote about and not on hearsay or tradition. My researches were made not only among modern books and ancient texts and living men, they were also made in the mysterious wittiness of my own consciousness. I am a researcher. That is my special job. Then I go on to convert the results of my research into notes and reports, into analysis and reflections. Later, I draw upon this material for my publishing writings. That is what he usually to do. He usually like to take notes, to write reporters, to interview people, to read books, but the main important source of his work was his own experience. And he speaks about philosophy because he said philosophy is a name general enough and don't belong to nobody. He didn't want to say that is the philosophy of India, or was philosophy for another country, or a philosophy for Orient or Occident. He make this term so general, as was used also in Greece. Among Greeks, they used the philosophy to say is the learning process from that person who is initiated, as us, correct? When we are in the path, we are initiated into the path. We start having, learning, studying. Then he called this a philosophy, different terminology. Also, he has different words. For example, he said mind with capital letter. He said mind is like a Godhead. Instead of say God or Brahma Nirguna, he called mind. Instead of say Brahma Saguna or God the Creator, he said word mind. And the seeds of the manifestation of this universe, he called a word idea. He decided he don't want to use the word soul because, different from the Indian, the Sanskrit words that you have, Atma, Brahma, that is so defined. has many concepts in the Western tradition that's a little confused. Then he decided to create his own terminology. But and then the notebooks that he wrote, that was after that published, was notes. He was inspired in some moment in his life, correct? He went so deep in his realization that he was receiving inspirations, thoughts. And all these books are notes, that sometimes he was, in some important river in London or in any place, he has always some notebook, or sometimes he wrote in chocolate paper, notebook, wherever he has a paper, because he was inspired for what he called the over-self. Maybe you could say what for him is the over-self?
Sure. So we'll talk more about some of these ideas that he gave his own terms to, and he really wanted to offer these teachings to a Western audience in a way that they could assimilate it. And I also want to reinforce this point that we can receive all this wisdom from our teachers and read the text, but we have to verify it in our own experience. And if the map we are given has 100 miles and we've only gone 1 mile, we still need to say, well, this 1 mile that I just went corresponds to what I read in this text, or corresponds to what my teacher told me. So it has to be realized from within, step by step. And our teachers are people who have realized more, but we can confirm little pieces of that in ourselves. So PB says, we are here on earth in pursuit of a sacred mission. We have to find what theologians call the soul, what philosophers call the overself. It is something which is at one and the same time both near at hand and far off. For it is the secret source of our life current, our selfhood, our consciousness. But because our life energy is continuously streaming outwards through the senses, because our selfhood is continuously identified with the body, and because our consciousness never contemplates itself, the overself necessarily eludes us entirely. So he's telling us why we don't realize the divinity within. Because our consciousness is streaming out through the senses. So that's why we have to meditate. We have to pull it back. We have to bring it in. We're identified with the body, so we have to learn, this is the instrument, this is the car I'm driving, but it's not me. This is where my soul is living. And our consciousness never contemplates itself, so that gets us to the who am I that he learned from Ramana. Who am I? Where does my awareness come from? Does it come from my brain like the scientists want to say? No, it's there first. So all these things, he's giving us guidelines that we obviously learn here and from other places because the truth is one. He says there are 4 goals which philosophy sets before the mind of a person. To know itself. Who am I? To know its overself, to know the universe, and to know its relation to the universe. So not only who am I, but what's going on here with this world? Is it an illusion? Is it a divine expression of God that I am supposed to worship and appreciate and serve? And to know what is my relationship to the universe. So he says we have to figure out the answer to those 4 questions.
Then, as Micha-El said, what really block us, I could say, correct, don't let us to be realized being right now, correct, because we are already this divine being. But it's because our mind always is outside. Then one day, we decided to go what they call the quest, correct? Everybody here is here because went to the quest one day, correct? Then Paul Brunton say that has two ways to approach for the quest. That is something important in his work that I will read for you in his words, these two approaches for the quest. He says, we should remember that there are two approaches for the quest, and both have to be used. There is the long path of self-improvement, self-purification, and self-effort. And there is a short path of forgetting the self entirely and directing our mind towards the goal, towards the one real life, by constant remembrance of it and by practicing self-identification with it. If we use this approach, we can progress to a certain point. But by bringing in the second approach, the higher power is brought into and comes to our help with grace. I will explain a little bit. Paul Brunton said then, we all are here, we are in the path, correct? In the quest, in the path. For him, he said, we have the long path and we have the short path. Everybody has to have both, long path and the short path. The long path is when we start purification, self-improvement, but still we are thinking in our ego, correct? Are thinking in improve. He said this is good, but can't be forever, because then we could be attached in this path. He said the short path is when we know we are divine, then we be identified with the divinity in us. If I have a bad thought, for example, I don't try to change for positive thought. If I have something, negative, I don't try. Of course, I want to improve my character, my moral, all these things. But in the short path, we try to remember all the time whom we are, for sure, the overself. It's like it has a background. In every activity we do, as we do here, correct? We are chanting and we are working and chanting. It's the same approach. You are doing your things, but you are knowing who you are. Then you try to act according to the divine in you. This he calls short path, and he has exercise for that. We aren't to have a time here to speak about all this. But in short, that is two approaches, he said.
In the U.S., we have this term called the spiritual bypass. So a lot of people think they're going to jump over their self-improvement and they don't have to work on their psychological stuff because I want to be, a spiritual person. And he's saying that doesn't work. You have to work on your psychological stuff. You have to transform yourself. You have to improve yourself. But you also have to always remember that you're divine and that you can consciously invoke that at every second.
He even has some simple exercise that he call if. He say, if I am the overself, the divine in me, how I walk. If I am the divinity, how I speak. If I am, the overself, how I act every day. And he assured to us that this also is important and is a good exercise, and he himself proved that because he really was enlightened in the end of his life, and he practiced everything. It is why his teachings also has the force, because it isn't theoretical. Theoretical. Theoretical, but is practical. That is also some aspect of his philosophy. And he said the short path, it is threefold, he said. First, stop search for the overself, since it flows you wherever you go. Second, believe in its presence with and within you. Third, keep you on try to understand its truth until you can abandon further thoughts, about it. You cannot acquire what is already here. So drop the ego's false idea and affirm the real one. You know, because we are here, we don't have nothing to correct, to acquire. We have already. At the reverse, we have to start like take off everything we aren't. It is why Ramana asked, who am I? Correct? Who am I? Because he said, in the end, the question, who am I, also drop off, and then the true self is there. Correct? Because I am, but when you say, I am this, I am that, I am, you know, this and that, this we are accumulating, you know, many things in our being. And one day you have to start peeling everything, because we say, I am here, this, that. But the truth is, we are. I am, only that. Then the more difficult part, correct?
So, for instance, in a lot of traditions, they say that it's like a dirty window that blocks the sun, so you have to clean the window, so that our personality needs to be cleaned up. Mm-hmm. That's the long path. But if you just meditate on the light, and you remember that there's pure light, and you try and become that light, that's a short path.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, when I spoke about PB met many important beings, he also met Swami Sivananda Maharshi, you know, that also is so important. We don't know when or how many times, but he also encountered with him, and he had all his books in his library. And at this moment, all his books and all his teachings are still in the center, a Wisdom Golden Road Center that we have for Paul Brunton in Ithaca, New York. Then, you know, he really was so present also in the life of Paul Brunton. By the way, Paul Brunton is called PB. Sometimes we say PB because this is how he called himself, and all students of him call him.
So we're sharing these different themes, like the short path, the quest. We'll be going into other themes. So when Gran was talking about the notebooks, he gets these inspirations and he writes them down, and then he organizes them into themes, like the quest, the short path, the long path, meditation, the overself. And then those themes he grouped into 28 ideas, he called ideas, and then in the 16 volumes of the notebooks covers all these 28 themes that he used to organize his spiritual understanding.
Yeah. It's like some spiritual encyclopedia, because, for example, if you want to have some question, and you want to resolve some, you know, problem, you go there in the volume 16, and you search in which volume you could find that theme you are speak about, you are search about, and that you know, really these notebooks, they are really cover many subjects, like the pet, the human relationships, how even like how take criticism, how work, like how besides facing problems, criticism of others, art, even art as a pet. You know, he really covers so many subjects, not only the quest itself, you know, the meditation, all these things, the ultimate reality, the philosophy, but also practical things from life.
It's very down to earth and in the sky, both at the same time.
Yeah.
You want to do the philosophic star?
I will share with you the philosophic star now, that he called philosophic star for some work he like. I will explain why the philosophic star. He in the beginning of his work, he was too much into mysticism, meditation, and he perceived later with his maturity that he was missing something. And the philosophic style is so similar, at least in my comprehension, I'm sorry if I'm not, but with the yoga of synthesis of the Swami Sivananda. Because this star has 5 points, and they are, each point is religion, veneration, mystical meditation, rational reflection, moral re-education, and altruistic services. Then he said, we have to have these 5 aspects in our life in balance. Because if you are too much into veneration, religion's veneration, and you don't meditate, or you meditate too much but you don't reflect about, or if you reflect too much, but you don't have, moral skills. Or if you have, moral skills, but, then you don't serve other, Then, everything together is so important. And as I start, to be balanced, one star can't have one more short point than the other. We have a balanced this path. The same with the short path and the long path. He said the balanced path is good. At the same time, we purify, we transform, we remember who we are and affirm that we are. That is some aspects then about, the philosophy of Paul Brunton. He say also that these practices of philosophy is an essential part for the quest, and not only consists in applying its principles and its wisdom to everyday active living, but also in realizing the divine presence deep within the heart, where it abides in tremendous stillness. I will repeat, the practice of philosophy is an essential part of the quest, and not only consists in applying its principles, its wisdom to every activity living, but also in realizing the divine presence deep within the heart, where it abides in tremendous stillness. Then we have to realize that. It's only to read, we can only read, we can only reflect, but you have to realize. Some teacher of Micha-El one time say that if you read all menus, and if you don't sit to eat and to digest and to absorb the food, you didn't get it. We have to have.
You can't eat the menu.
You can eat the menu. Then, his philosophy then isn't something, is practical. You have to, live the truth. As our teachers, correct? As we see here this beautiful work and all you hear, this is alive, correct? Swami Sivananda Maharaj left some legacy so alive that still all you, like these beautiful people here, like all these older students, we are so touched by to see how these 40 years are being alive and doing this beautiful work.
And he's an example because he had this unbelievable tapas, right? Like if you read his life, the austerities that he subjected himself to were beyond. But then what did he do with his realization? Serve others, make a dispensary for the sadhus. Everything that you do here, have a hospital. So spiritual philosophy has to be applied in everyday life. And in terms of the philosophic start, P.B. criticized his own first books because, as Gran said, there was too much emphasis on meditation. And I won't mention any names, but he criticizes certain spiritual teachers because he says they're giving a short path teaching, which is correct, but they're leaving out the long path. So they're leaving out the development that we need to undergo to get to that. So let's talk more about the overself. The overself is the inner or true self of the person, reflecting the divine being and attributes. The overself is an emanation from the ultimate reality, but it is neither a division nor a detached fragment of it. It is a ray shining forth, but not the sun itself. So let me try and use other words. Atman is Brahman. The ray of the sun is the sun. The light is the light. They're the same. But if I realize my Atman, I don't realize Brahman. I realize the light within myself, and I can contact Brahman. I can go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. I can have this divine consciousness. But people would say the farthest we can get is to realize the Atman within ourselves, which is a ray of the sun. So then he says, he's describing realization. At long last, when the union of self with overself is total and complete, some part of the consciousness will remain unmoving in infinity, unending in eternity. There, in that sacred glory, the person will be preoccupied with their divine identity, held to it by irresistible magnetism, gladly and lovingly. He talks a lot about the love of your higher self is the most important love. But he says some part of the consciousness. That means the other part of the consciousness is in the world. We're doing all the seva, we're doing all this work, we're active. And while we're active at the same time, for the realized person, in the background is this ever-present divinity that is lived and never forgotten. So let's talk about the world mind. The world mind is a radiation of the forever incomprehensible mind. It is the essence of all things and all beings. So just as we have a soul or an overself, there's a world soul or a world divinity that creates the world. I think the Hindu term for that would be
Ishvara.
Ishvara. He's talking about Ishvara.
World mind.
But he's putting it into English language.
Yeah.
So one more theme we wanted to talk about, which is what he calls the difference between the mystic and the philosopher. And he's using the word in a very specific sense. But when he came to India, he met a lot of people who were only concerned with their own realization. He met many yogis who could go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, could go into a trance and leave the world behind and have all this divine bliss. And then they would come out of it and the world would still be there. And they would think, I don't like this world, I'm going back into my trance. So he said that's incomplete realization because the world is also divine. And when you get to the ultimate realization, there's no difference between inner and outer. We call that non-duality. So he felt that a lot of people went really far, but they didn't go far enough. They stopped short because they were happy with their trance meditations. And by the way, that's why one of his books was called The Hidden Teaching Beyond Yoga. He said yoga is a step, but not a stop. He wasn't criticizing yoga. He was saying there's something more. So he says, it is not enough to attain knowledge of the soul. That it is necessary to attain clear knowledge. Only the philosophic mystic, thank you, may do that. So you're a mystic and a philosopher. And when you're a mystic and a philosopher, you have knowledge of the world, not only of the self. That's why he said, it's not only who am I, but what am I and what is my relation to the world. Mm-hmm. This emphasis is important. It implies a removal of all the obstructions in feeling, the complexes in the mind, the obfuscations in the ego which prevent it. When this is done, the aspirant beholds truth as it really is. So you have the long path, then you become a mystic and have all these great inner states, and you love it and you don't want to leave them. But then you realize you haven't solved the problem of the world, and you haven't solved the problem of your place in the world. And that's the realization of the philosopher. And by the way, I'll use this place as an example. That's why the Forest Academy and the retreats that you go to are so important, because you're developing your understanding alongside of your practices to have the experience.
Yeah. You know, Paul Brunton, he speaks about 4 steps of development, spiritual development, if I could say that. There he has the person who is a materialist, that believe only the material world. Has the religions, seria the second step, the religious step, where the person thinks God is outside. Has the mystic stage, that the person understands and feel that the God is inside too. And the 4th, he called the philosophic, stage, where, people know that God is in everywhere, inside, in everywhere, in every being, every creature. That is a little synthesis, I could say, from the teachings of Paul Brunton. I don't know if Micha-El wants to say a little more.
I want to read a quote from the introduction to one of his books by one of the princes of Nepal. Because after PB came back as a famous person, he had a lot of contact with the royalty of India, as well as with all the great teachers, including Swami Sivananda Maharshi. So this person said, "I am convinced that Brunton is one of the chosen instruments to reinterpret the half-lost wisdom of the East to those caught up in the mechanical life of the West, and thus serve his cause." So that was his dharma. I'll make a personal observation. When PB came here, Westerners knew very little about all this, right? And so he put it in a form that they could digest. But my observation is now that India in some ways is becoming westernized and modernized, there's many people here who have lost contact with their own traditions. We've met young people who say, "I don't know what the Bhagavad Gita is. I think my grandmother has that book." Imagine. So I believe, because Paul Brunton developed this synthesis designed for a Western audience, that people who aren't ready to come here, people who have lost their connection with India's sacred heritage, could get help going back to it through PB. So one other quote, he says, "It is to the overself that we must consecrate our ultimate allegiance." So if we have a guru, we have to be faithful to them. If we have a tradition, we have to be faithful to that. But in the end, we have to be faithful to our own higher self. That's the test. Because if we're not faithful to that, we lose ourselves. I'll read one more. In his final years, when we believe he was, you could say fully enlightened, and he was living as a hermit, he said, "To the outside observer, my declining years have been dead ones, apparently spent in inactivity and futility," because he disappeared. But this is only one side of the picture, for they have also been spent in hidden activity on a higher plane, as much as for my own spiritual growth as for the world's peace. So these great masters, because their consciousness is so high, they can change things from within as well as from without, because they can influence, let's say, the subtle dimensions of reality that we might not have contact with.
And I was reading some biography, some stories about the Swami Sivananda, how he was many miracles he did, also like work in these dimensions, as Micha-El is speaking about, like how many souls he helped.
Mandukya Upanishad, right, of the fourth state of consciousness, it's unseen, untouched, and unknown. The only grace I beg for is the grace of loving thee. That is my prayer. So, in conclusion, there's a Paul Brunton YouTube called Paul Brunton Official. There's a recording there of his voice. It's the only actually existing recording of his voice. It's really worthwhile listening to him. There's a lot of teachings that we give there. There's a foundation devoted to preserving his teaching. The website is paulbrunton.org. So hopefully that's easy to remember. And we have our own website, which is called thepathophilosophy.org. So we want to thank you all and thank the Swamis for having us. As we said, when we came here the other day, we were really impressed with what we saw here, and we really felt it was a living tradition, and when the teacher dies, that's not always the case. The disciples don't always live up to the inspiration of the teacher. But the fact that there's so many people in this room and you all look so beautiful and alive is a sign that there's something going on here that's really good. So we hope that this was helpful to hear another point of view about the same thing that you're hearing about here.
Thank you to all. Nice to be here.
Namaste.
Hari Om. We are thankful to Gran and Micha-El for talking about Paul Brunton's life and teachings, which is also similar to who is also very much interested in Gurudev Swami Sivananda Maharaj teachings. We are very, very happy to hear them. May the grace of the Almighty, worshipful Gurudev be over upon them, is our heartfelt prayer. Thank you very much. There is an announcement. Your kind attention, please. In connection with the 81st anniversary of Pratishtha Mahotsava of Sri Vishwanath Mandir on 31st December 2024, there will be a special Sankirtan program at Holy Shrine of Lord Sri Vishwanath. The program of Kirtan will be from 27th December to 29th December 2024. Time will be this Matru Satsang 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Gents Kirtan will be from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. On 30th December 2024, there will be Akhand Kirtan from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mantra for chanting Om Namah Shivaya and also lighting of Akhanda lamp at 7 a.m. by Swamiji's on 30th December 2024. All the sadhakas, guests, inmates and visitors of the ashram are requested to attend the function, make it a grand success. May the blessings of Lord Vishwanath and worshipful Gurudev be over upon all. Let us offer prayers for universal peace and welfare of all beings. Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Gagana Sadrusam Tattvamasyaadilaksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadhi Sakshyabhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tam Namami.